This should be good so far. Hmm. Aloha there, and we're back to Blackbeard. I figure I'll just restart the introduction paragraph of Blackbeard. Understanding where he come from and all stuff. One of the biggest tidbit, as you can see, it's even shown in the picture, is that he would smoke his own hair as a sign of him being batshit crazy. But in a way where he's an effective, a functional sociopath. So, Edward Thatch, better known as Blackbeard, was an English pirate who operated around the West Indies and the eastern coast of Britain's North American colonies. Little is known about his early life, but he may have been a sailor on privateer ships during Queen Anne's War before he settled on the Bohemian island of New Providence, a base of Captain Benjamin Hornigold, whose crew Thatch joined around 1716. Hornigold placed him in command of a sloop that he had captured, and the two engaged in numerous acts of piracy. Alright. Is it a lighting here in my background? Or is this just the stream? After all, it's not an issue of me, but for others. But then again, others can always just speak up. So, their numbers were boosted by the addition to their fleet of two more ships, one of which was commanded by Stad Bonnet. But Hornigold retired from piracy toward the end of 1717, taking two vessels with him. Thatch captured a French slave ship known as La Concorde, renamed her Queen Anne's Revenge, equipped her with 40 guns, and crewed her with over 300 men. He had become a renowned pirate. His nickname derived from his thick black beard and fearsome appearance. He was reported to have tied lit fuses, slow matches, under his hat to frighten his enemies. He formed an alliance of pirates and blockaded the port of Charlestown, South Carolina, ransoming the port inhabitants. He then ran. Oh, that got my attention in my eyes. Let's see. Okay, this is good. Tilt it a little bit here. Get this down here. Well, I am having a hunch that just like my other hardware equipment, not just a webcam, it being docked, such is a power issue. So, turning this off and then turning back on, it's still having some issues. Which stinks, because it seems like when it comes to just streaming, it always has this problem. And when it comes to applications, depending on how much power it uses with this computer, then it just has issues. Not much issues like a laptop or a desktop. It has a whole brand new issues. Alrighty. Ransomed the port's inhabitants, he then ran Queen Anne's Revenge aground on a sandbar near Beaufort, North Carolina. He parted company with Bonnet and settled in Bath, North Carolina, also known as Bathtown, where he accepted a royal pardon. However, he was soon back at sea, where he attracted the attention of Alexander Spotswood, the governor of Virginia. Spotswood arranged for a party of soldiers and sailors to capture him. On 22 November 1718, following a furious battle, Thatch and several of his crew were killed by a small force of sailors led by Lieutenant Robert Maynard. Thatch was a shrewd and calculated leader who spurned the use of violence, relying instead of his fearsome image to elicit this response that he had desired from those whom he robbed. He was romanticized after his death and became the inspiration of an archetypical pirate in works of fiction across many genres. So yeah, we're gone through his estimated time where he was born, 1680, which even then again, it's presumed. But it's interesting that they put down Bristol, Kingdom of England. Understanding that this was not the British Empire that set forth in colonies, but rather still part of the Kingdom of England when it came to the area in the UK not being united. And then when it came to his death, yeah, it's accurately pointed at. 22 November 1718, and Ocracoke, Providence of North Carolina. So, we could go on when it comes to context. And, funnily enough, most of his legacy has to follow with his death. And then later on, when it comes to many depictions of him in different genres, like books, video games, TV, movies, there's a lot of things about him. But let's see his early life. So, little is known of Blackbeard's early life. It is common believed that in this time of his death, he was between 35 and 40 years old, and thus born in about 1680. In contemporary records, his name is most often given as Blackbeard, Edward Thatch, or Edward Thatch, or Teach, depending on how people pronounce it, because even with Thatch, people would pronounce it as Theach, or Teach, depending on where you are, like in the American colonies or in the UK, even when it comes to other people or non-English speakers. Because the golden age of piracy, it was part of a dominated, colonized Caribbean with a bunch of empires just vying control, either when it comes to the French, the Spanish, or the English. So yeah. The latter is most often used. Several spellings of his surname existed: Thatch, Tatch, Thach, Thach, Tack, Theach, Titch, and so on. Or Thatch, 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 Thatch. One early source claims that his surname was Drummond, but the lack of any supporting documentation makes this unlikely. Pirates habitually use fictitious surnames while engaged in piracy so as not to tarnish the family name, which makes it unlikely that Thatch's real name was ever being known. Yeah, that's interesting to look at it. Because, well, honestly, when it came to this page on the wiki about understanding where it says Thatch most likely has a surname because of family names, or tarnishing the family names. Well, that's something that it's always presumed why a bunch of pirates had these various names. But to understand, and this is something related to me just talking before, is that when it comes to learning about history, about the average man versus the aristocrat to the most important figures in history, because for God's sakes, a lot of people know about the French Revolution when it comes to Napoleon, and not the many other revolutionaries was there. Even though he really didn't partake in the French Revolution protests and all that, it was just later on where he became a main figure in the end, where he later declared the French Revolution ended and therefore the Napoleonic Wars pretty much started and ended. Even though the French Revolution, despite the ideals, was a thing Europe had to endure before, during, and after, which is quite interesting when looking at it in that perspective. The point is that when it came to these pirates, a reason why their documentation is not known is because most of these pirates were from people who didn't came from wealth, because it's very similar when it comes to reporting the average person in the before the Common Era, earlier the Common Era, and that's such. That's the reason why when it comes to learning about the society in Japan, and when it comes to the peasantry, we don't have many first-hand accounts of them, and most of the famous accounts are actually from other aristocratic people from the elite wealth class in that feudal system, talking about what they've examined in their lives. So it's a bit of a romanticization, centralism that is not like propaganda. It just focuses on one person's life, one person's viewpoint, and not putting significance of why recording something, why analyzing something was not so important to them. So when it came to the golden age of piracy, to understand what the pirates have lived, what they have think, what they done, wasn't analyzed back then. Similar to when it comes to the Vikings, where many people who end up writing about the Vikings ended having a certain prejudice against them because of their actions towards others, lack of culture, or when it comes to communication. Even though the fact that the Vikings left a good enough record to know their presence in different worlds, that other people can communicate that there was a Viking culture, a Viking people that later put roots. But that is something I could talk more about. But anyway, if these people are willing to do criminal acts that was considered appalling back then, they probably wouldn't care much of the tarnish of the family members as do now when it comes to people who do put focus on, depending on what society they are in the world today, what they uh, do for a living, as it's more like it could be more of a pragmatic individual's reason. After all, if Blackbeard has used the name as an intimidation tactic, then who's to say that that might not be the case for all these titles? And I say these titles, not these nicknames or surnames, because you must understand that a name was originally supposed to be a title that could represent a person's clan. I mean, going to South Korea, when it comes to understanding people's last names, they could try to follow some family lineage and some prestige into communities in that way. So it's something that, people don't like to oversight. After all, Blackbeard was a person. I'm a person too. The others were also people too. But yeah, maybe one day we'll definitely learn more about Blackbeard's early life and how he's related to the life he ended up living in the past to once he died. Because, boy, it's fascinating understanding all these people from different demographics during the golden age of piracy, when it came to probably being something that put everybody in in these events, these stages. After all, the golden age of piracy is something that you don't read often when it comes to history. only sometimes. So, do. Okay. So yeah, pirates happily use fictitious surnames while engaged in piracy so as not to tarnish the family name, which makes it unlikely that Thatcher's real name will ever be known. So, the 17th century rise of Britain's American colonies and the rapid 18th century expansion of the Atlantic slave trade had made Bristol an important international seaport, and Thatch was most likely raised in what was then the second largest city in England. He could also certainly read and write. He communicated with merchants and, when killed, had in his possession a letter addressed to him by the Chief Justice and Secretary of the Province of Carolina, Thomas Knight. Author Robert Lee speculated that Thatch may therefore have been born in a respectable, wealthy family. He may have arrived in the Caribbean in the last years of the 17th century on a merchant vessel, possibly a slave ship. The 18th century author Charles Johnson claimed that Thatch was for some time a sailor operating from Jamaica on privateer ships during the War of the Spanish Succession, and that he had often distinguished himself for his uncommon boldness and personal courage. It is unknown at what point during the war Thatch joined the fight, as with the record of most of his life before he became a pirate. New Providence. With his history of colonialism, trade, and piracy, the West Indies was a settling for many 17th and 18th century maritime incidences. The privateer turned pirate Henry Jenkins? Jennings? Yeah, it's Jenkins. And his fathers decided early in the 18th century to use the uninhabitable island of New Providence as a base for their operations. It was within easy reach of the Florida Strait and his busy shipping lanes, which was filled with European vessels crossing the Atlantic. New Providence's harbor could easily accompanied hundreds of ships, but was too shallow for the Royal Navy's large vessels. The author George Woodbury described New Providence as no city of homes. It was a place of contemporary sojourn and refreshment for a literary floating populations. Continuing, the lonely permanent residents were the piratical. Piratical. Piratical camp followers, the traders and the hanger-on. All others were transient. In New Providence, privateers found a welcome respite from the law. Respite. So Thatch was one of those who came to enjoy the island's benefits. Probably shortly after the signing of the Treaty of Utrecht, he moved there from Jamaica and, along with most privateers once involved in the war, became involved in piracy. Possibly about 1716, he joined the crew of Captain Benjamin Hornigold, a renowned pirate who operated from New Providence safe waters. In 1716, Hornigold placed Thatch in charge of a sloop he had taken as a prize. In early 1717, Hornigold and Thatch, each captaining a sloop, set out for the mainland. They captured a boat carrying 120 barrels of flour out of Havana, and shortly therefore took 100 barrels of wine from the sloop out of Bermuda. A few days later, they stopped a vessel sailing from Madeira to Charlestown, South Carolina. Thatch and his quartermaster William Howard may at this time have struggled to control their crews. By then, they had probably developed a taste for Madeira wine, and on 29 September near Cape Charles, all they took from the Betty of Virginia was her cargo of Madeira before they scuttled her with the remaining cargo. It was during this cruise. It was during this cruise with Hornigold that the earliest known report of Thatch was made, in which he is recorded as a pirate in his own right, in command of a large crew, in a report made by Captain Matthew Munch on On an anti-piracy patrol for North Carolina, Dutch was described as operating a sloop, 6 guns, and about 70 men. In September, Dutch and Hornigold encountered Stede Bonnet, a landholder and military officer from a wealthy family who obtained his piracy earlier this year. Bonnet's crew of about 70 were reportedly dissatisfied with his command, so with Bonnet's permission, Thatch took control of his ship Revenge. The pirates' flotilla. It's flotilla. Huh. There's a bunch of words here that I haven't read off straight. So it does seem these are a bunch of pirate terms. Not much different when it comes to the Wild West and learning about cowboys and Indians. The pirate flotilla was now consisted of 3 ships: Dutch Revenge, Dutch Old Slope, and Honengold Ranger. By October, another vessel had been captured and added to the small fleet. The slopes Robert of Philadelphia and Good Intendant of Dublin were stopped on 22 October 1717 and their cargo holds emptied. As a former British privateer, Hornigold attacked only his old enemies, but for his crew, the sight of British vessels filled with vulnerable cargo passing from unharmed became too much, and at some point toward the end of 1717, he was demoted. Whether Thatch had any involvement in his decision is unknown, but Hornigold quickly retired from piracy. He took Ranger and one of his slopes, leaving Thatch with Revenge and the remaining slope. The two never met again, and as did many other combatants of New Providence, Hornigold accepted the king's pardon. Oh man, that voice. I wonder if it's quite different as the other voices. Blackbeard. On 28th November 1717, Thatch's 2 ships attacked a French merchant vessel off the coast of St. Vincent. They each fired a broadside across its bulwarks, killing several of his crew and forcing his captain to surrender. Yeah, that actually is quite a bit difference. I'm starting to actually see now that when it comes to the accent, when talking like a deep voice, you can sort of still understand how the person who's speaking of it, that's in his natural voice, or per se. So that those are something I gotta work out. Let me just drink more of this. So yeah, I'll just reread this with a deep voice. On 28th November 1717, Thatch's 2 ships attacked a French merchant vessel off the coast of St. Vincent. They each fired a broadside across its bulwarks, killing several of its crews and forcing its captain to surrender. The ship was La Concorde, a large French Guianaman registered in Saint Malo and carrying a cargo of slaves. The ship had originally been the English merchantman Concorde, captured in 1711. My mistake. Captured in 1711 by a French squadron and then charged hands several times by 1717. Thatch and his crew sailed the vessels south along St. Vincent and the Grenadines to Bequia, where they disembarked her crew and cargo and converted the ship for their own use. The crew of La Concorde were given the smaller of Thatch's 2 slopes, which they renamed Badvesa Rancontro, bad meeting, and sailed for Martique. Thatch may have recruited some of their slaves, but the remainder were left on the island and were later recaptured by the returning crew of Mavrasi Rencontre. No, that's quite unfortunate. But it does show that some of them who actually did become slaves now became privateers, or at least crewmen for a privateer or a pirate crew and under pirate management. Thatch immediately renamed La Concorde as Queen Anne's Revenge and equipped her with 40 guns. By this time, Thatch had placed his Lieutenant Richards in command of Bonnet's Revenge. In late November near St. Vincent, he attacked the Great Allen. After a lengthy engagement, he forced the large and well-armed merchant ship to surrender. He ordered her to move closer to the shore, disembarked her crew and emptied her cargo holds, and then burned and sank the vessel. The incident was chronicled in the Boston News letter, which called Thatch commander of a French ship of 32 guns. It collected the 10-gun Brigantine. Brigantine. Yeah, never. Brigantine. 10-gun Brigantine. Shit. So, another word for brigade? Huh. Unless I'm... Yeah, maybe that's just me overthinking about it, but maybe this was an old term used to refer to a brigade. Or, the modern term definition of a brigade when it comes to the Navy. But by the time he may have been in command of at least 150 men split among 3 vessels, on 5th December 1717, Thatch stopped the merchant sloop Margaret off the coast of Crab Island near Angola, or Angolai. Her captain Henry Bostock and his crew remained Thatch's prisoners for about 8 hours and forced to watch as their sloop was ransacked. Bonskin, who has been held abroad, Queen Anne's Revenge, was returned unharmed to Margarity. Yeah, it's not Marge or Margette, but it's Margarity, and was allowed to leave with his crew. He returned to his base of operations on St. Christopher Island and reported the matter to Governor Walter Hamilton, who requested that he assign an there's another word. Affidavit. Okay. An affidavit is a written statement voluntarily made by an affiant or deponent under an oath or affirmation which is administered by a person who is authorized to do so by law. Oh shit, this is like an old legal term. I guess even back then they didn't understand either. Oh shoot, there is a lot to go under. Let me see where I actually left off. Oh yeah, let me also go through images. So I already gone through this one. And this one I passed. So Edward Thatch Blackbeard, Walking the Plank from the Pirates of the Spanish series and 19 Cigarette Card by Allen and Kendrick. So this is another interpretation of Edward Thatch. A younger version. And there's also another one. Which I could look more at the pictures later, but yeah. I guess at the time.